Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Best Practices for Acquiring and Implementing eBook Collections, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use that to ask questions of Sara and Wouter as they present. You should be able to see the other attendees' questions. If you have the same question as someone else, or you think the question that someone else has asked is a good one, please use the little thumbs up icon to upvote that question, and that will help to let us know what folks are most interested in talking about during the Q&A, which we will have at the end of the presentation. During that time, we'll answer as many questions as we have time for. So please send in the questions that you do have throughout, and again, use that little upvote feature to let us know which questions are most interesting to you. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version of the presentation. Our speakers today are Sara Duff of the University of Central Florida Libraries and Wouter van der Velde of Springer Nature. Sara works mainly in monograph acquisitions, including streaming video, and Sara will focus her talk about the ways to increase access while decreasing costs, how the library can help with textbook affordability, and meaningful collection assessment methods. Wouter is Senior eProduct Manager, eBooks at Springer Nature, and is the in-depth product specialist for eBooks. Wouter was instrumental in the creation and launch of the eBook product back in 2007 and continues today to be responsible for eBook product management strategy, product development, product technology developments, and a number of collaborations across this product at Springer Nature. In this position, he is responsible for communication of MARC records and MyCopy, as well as business models and pricing. So with that, we are ready to get started. So I will turn the presentation over to Sara.
All right, thank you, Mark. Let me share my PowerPoint here. All right, can you see that okay?
Yes, it looks good.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. So yes, I am the Acquisitions and Collection Assessment Librarian at the University of Central Florida here in Orlando. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about the University of Central Florida, but if you're not familiar, I want to give you a couple relevant facts. So UCF is huge. We are enormous. We are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, university in the United States. We have, last I heard, we had about 70,000 students, I think just over 70,000 students. And we have, I can't even tell you the number of programs that we are trying to support with the library because it's just constantly in flux, constantly changing, and we have a very high level of research activity. So we have a lot of people trying to use the library. We have a lot of programs we need to support for, accreditation purposes, and for research purposes. And of course, and I know everyone says that, but of course, we never have enough money to do everything that we want to do. So we're going to talk specifically about eBooks today and the different ways that we have found a way to build eBook collections at UCF. So here we go. Okay. So let's talk about different models of acquisition. So these are different ways that we can get eBooks into the library, and UCF does every single one of these. And I think we've done every single one of these at the consortial level too. So in Florida, we have a very active consortium, and historically we've tried just about every way to get eBooks for all the different universities in Florida, all the public universities in Florida rather. But then we do all these at the local level as well. So the only one I'm not really going to focus on too much here is the firm order title by title, because that is fairly self-explanatory, I think, where you want an ebook, you buy an ebook. That's fairly straightforward. But I will say that is probably, for UCF, that is probably the acquisitions method that people outside the library have the most control over, or the most ability to suggest titles or request titles. Those tend to be the firm order title by title. But of course, we would love to get faculty feedback. But when you're at a place as large as UCF, communication can be really difficult. So we have a subject librarians, we have that model, subject liaison model, and they communicate with the faculty. So, in acquisitions, I don't have a lot of direct communication with faculty, so I don't hear a lot that way about suggestions, but it does get filtered through the subject librarians, and we have conversations that way. Okay, so I put these kind of not in any particular order, so I don't want you to think I have, one favorite over another based on this, but let's get into these a little bit. So first, let's talk about evidence-based acquisitions. So we really like this at UCF. This is, I think, a really interesting model. And before I worked at UCF, I worked at a small community college library. And I didn't really see the value in evidence-based acquisitions. I thought, well, why wouldn't you just do patron-driven or demand-driven? I don't really see the point. But here at UCF, this has been very valuable for us. So first of all, with evidence-based acquisitions, you get to negotiate what's in your pool. So with a lot of publishers, that's going to be based on the publication year and maybe the subjects, or maybe they're even more flexible and will let you request specific titles to get moved into the pool, or maybe they'll do it based on your turnaways or your denials or whatever. And you also can negotiate your deposit amount. But I will say, I think these evidence-based programs can be quite expensive. So it's not something that you can just throw together and do. You do have to have an amount reserved for that. They can get pretty pricey. But something we really, really value at UCF is having perpetual rights to eBooks. And that is definitely a benefit of evidence-based acquisitions. We have so many programs here, we have so many courses, and we're constantly having new programs added. So it's really helpful for us to actually be able to build a collection permanently and not just have temporary access. Now, evidence-based acquisitions does involve some temporary access, but then at the end of your time period, your essentially subscription period, you get to choose, you put your deposit toward what books you want to keep perpetually. So someone in acquisitions gets to make all the decisions about what you are going to add to your collection using that deposit money. So that's really great. But it can be really important if you do have faculty or subject librarians who are actively requesting titles. It can be really important to track what titles in that evidence-based pool they want to keep permanently. So I do this kind of, maybe not the most efficient way, but I do this with a spreadsheet. But I think there are other ways that you can do it. Maybe creating a folder in your, like in Gobi or Oasis, or you could create a form. There are a lot of different ways that you could do this, probably more efficiently than I have been, but it's going to depend on your library. But I think that's a great way to let subject librarians and faculty still have a voice in building this collection and deciding what you get to keep. But there are some downsides. So as I mentioned before, evidence-based does have some temporary access. You're not going to be able to choose every book in the pool. And if it's very expensive, you may not have the money to renew it for another year. So when a program ends and you lose access to all those books that you didn't choose, that can really cause frustration. Uh, I, I have seen it pretty much every time we've had an evidence-based plan end or even just change where we wanted to shift the pub dates and we're losing access to this small pool, even though that pool had, didn't have robust usage, and we didn't have enough usage to choose those particular titles. Even if they had zero usage, it can still really cause frustration, both in your subject librarians who don't always understand some of these finer points of acquisitions. Excuse me. And certainly in your teaching faculty who frequently don't think of the library as having temporary access to things. They think if I see it in the catalog, then we own it and I can use it. So it's really important to impress upon your subject librarians that they need to reach out to faculty and really, hammer home the point of, if you want to assign a book as a reading, please let us know so that we can ensure that we keep it. And if usage is low, it's really difficult to make your choices for evidence-based acquisitions. So here's where UCF really shines. We have so many people, our usage is always high. It always is. We hear it again and again from our vendors. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a vendor say, oh, your usage was really disappointing. They're always impressed because we have so many people. Of course, our usage is going to be pretty high. As long as we're able to get the records in the catalog in a timely order and make the collection discoverable, our usage is going to be good. But if you're at a place that maybe isn't so large, or maybe doesn't have a lot of ebook users, or people are hesitant to use online resources in this way, it may be difficult for you to get an evidence-based program off the ground, and you might want to budget for 2 years just to kind of have the same pool for 2 years and see if people kind of get the hang of it and your usage goes up in the second year. That can happen too. Okay, so I think probably everyone is pretty familiar with demand-driven acquisitions or patron-driven acquisitions. So, maybe you get to negotiate the pool of titles, maybe you don't. That probably depends on the publisher. Sometimes you can even set up a profile and have books, if they match this profile, they go into your demand-driven pool. But, every vendor works differently. You set up your deposit amount, which I think you generally have a little bit more control over that with demand-driven than with evidence-based. So this can be a great way to kind of fill in the cracks between your other plans, maybe your package purchases, or an evidence-based program. If you know there are titles out there that aren't in these other methods, a lot of times you can pick them up from demand-driven acquisitions, and then you don't have to buy them outright at the front. You can only pay for them if they really get used. But of course there are downsides, so you do lose control over that in terms of control over building your long-term collection, because there may be quality titles in there that don't get triggered for purchase, that don't get used, and then those might at some point fall out of your pool. So then you would have to know to go back and fill in the gaps. So you can kind of get some holes in your collection this way. And the big downside for UCF was lots of use equals lots of money. So demand-driven can be a double-edged sword for us. Of course, we want people to use our resources. We never want to discourage use of our resources, but we only have so much money. So demand-driven can be a challenge for us. But if you're at a smaller place, or if your usage isn't quite as robust, demand-driven can be just ideal, because you can kind of get a wide spread and see what people are really interested in and see what really gets used. But of course, titles can move in and out of the pool depending upon negotiations with publishers. If you have a demand-driven program from an aggregator like EBSCO or ProQuest, they're negotiating with publishers on what can be in the pool. So, those things can change and titles can get moved in and out, which is always frustrating. Again, people, your students, your faculty, they don't they're not going to think that things can disappear. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. And I will say, I debated on putting my second point on here that's relatively easy to set up and doesn't require a lot of librarian oversight. You could definitely argue this point. I think if you really spend your time getting it set up, or if you really have a vendor rep who knows your library well, it can really help you out. It can be easy to set up. It can also take some time. But if you get it set up just the way you want it, I think it does not require a lot of librarian oversight, but that can definitely depend on if you want to tweak it while it's running. So that point is debatable. Okay, so subscriptions. Now, UCF does have some ebook subscriptions. I think right now we mainly have them at the consortial level because generally they do not carry perpetual rights. So you have access to all these ebooks, all these great ebooks, but you're not going to get to keep them when the subscription runs out. So that's a huge downside for UCF. So we tend to shy away from subscriptions, but they can be very valuable. They can particularly be valuable if you know, say, you have a lot of demand for technical books, and you know you really only want the most current titles. You could get a subscription for those titles and then, you know, just have it only be a front list, and each year it's going to be a new batch, or you know, as long as you have access to them, you know, you will only have, you know, books published in, say, the last 3 years or something like that. Those are all probably things that you can negotiate with the publisher. So subscriptions can be very valuable. You know, maybe for medical books as well. That could be really helpful. That's you know, some of those medical programs, you really do want to be careful about having older materials in the collection. So, you know, subscriptions definitely have their place. And package purchases. So I'm also a big fan of package purchases, again, because there are so many different ebook packages out there. You can really fill some great gaps in your collection. And by purchasing them as a package rather than title by title, you can kind of pick up some titles or maybe some smaller niche subject areas that you might not think to pick up, that then your users can access and may really be valuable titles that you wouldn't have thought of, or you wouldn't have known would be helpful later on. So of course, you know, if you're doing a purchase, these are going to be perpetual rights. If you are getting them directly from the publisher on their platform, pretty much always they're going to be either DRM free or what we call DRM friendly, which is, you know, people can download the whole book. They might have to download it chapter by chapter, but there won't be limits on the number of pages they can download or print or save. I know our students are often frustrated when they try to use an ebook that has strict DRM and they can't download the whole thing at once. They really like to be able to, you know, download at least the chapters that they need without running into those limits. And there are a lot of small publishers out there with really niche content. So that is really helpful for us because, say, we can look at our different journal packages that we get, or our different journal publishers, and a lot of those will also have small ebook collections that are not particularly expensive. And, you know, if we are already getting their journals, many times their ebooks will live on the same site, so there's no additional setup. But you do have to watch out. We might have to sign a license for each platform. So if we're getting these small ebook packages, or even these large ebook packages, if we're getting a lot of them on a lot of different publishers or a lot of different platforms, if they're new, we may have to sign licenses for each of those. And because, again, because UCF is so large, you know, it's a big organism. So we do not have signing authority in the library. So all of these licenses need to go through a general counsel's office. And as you can imagine, our general counsel's office is very busy. So all of these things can take a lot of time. So that can really be a sticking point for us, particularly if we have, you know, money at the end of the year and we really want to use it for an ebook package, or we really want to pick up these books. it can really be a challenge to try to navigate that in a limited time frame. So if you're in a similar situation or think you might, keep that in mind, that it can be very tricky to get through all of these hurdles. And the last point for package purchases that I want to talk about is it can really be great to lower your approval costs. So we at UCF still get print approvals, even now, even in the age of COVID. We've still been getting some print approvals, but it's definitely been going down because as we add either an evidence-based plan or package purchases, as we're able to do those, we take those titles off of our approval plan. It can be a challenge to kind of figure out, is this worth the expense of either the package purchase or the approval plan, or if we're taking our evidence-based titles off, we may not end up purchasing those particular ones that would match the approval plan. So it can, there's a little bit of a risk in getting some gaps in your collection there. But overall, it can be really valuable to see, okay, we're going to get all of these through this package purchase as eBooks as opposed to print. That's really going to open up our access. And maybe it's more money, but maybe it's worth it. So that is something that you need to look at for your library and kind of decide what your priorities are. And I will say we definitely have gotten some pushback from faculty, particularly in the humanities. This was pre-COVID, but we definitely got pushback about, why are you not getting our books in print anymore? And we really had to explain to them, but this is, much better access for your students. They're DRM-free ebooks, and we get all of them. We weren't getting all of them before. We were only getting this narrow part in print. They're still, not particularly happy. Some people really just like print, but you just kind of have to make those decisions at the library level. So other things to watch out for, regardless of the acquisitions model that you're going for, you want to look at, are there going to be platform fees or other annual fees or even update fees? You really want to have that information up front. You want to know, what is involved in this purchase. Am I just paying for the content, or are these other fees going to pop up? You don't want to be surprised. You also really want to take a look at your licenses before either you sign them or your general counsel signs them. We have had some where publishers wanted a guaranteed spend from us a year, or they were going to hit us with a fee or a fine, and we don't sign those licenses, so we were not able to get that content. And there are reasons for and against, but just know what you're getting into. You don't want to be surprised. And take a look at trying to integrate any big purchases, either evidence-based or demand-driven or package purchases. A lot of these you can run through Gobi or Oasis to help eliminate duplication when you're doing firm orders. Title by title firm orders, and it can really be helpful for your subject librarians because sometimes there are delays in getting MARC records into your catalog. As my my last point here mentioned, sometimes the front list, sometimes those MARC records can take a while from some publishers to get into the catalog. And if you're buying, say when we buy our Springer eBooks, we may buy the 2021 collection at the end of 2020. So we've already paid for all these books. And if we run it through Gobi or Oasis, it will show the subject librarians when they're looking at titles, this is going to be included on this package. So you guys have already paid for this. So don't try to buy it again on a different platform. So all of those things can be really helpful. With evidence-based, I will say it's not quite as important. I mean, I personally think it's very important to run it through Gobi or Oasis if you can, because I get a lot of questions from subject librarians about, what's included on our evidence-based plans. But, even if somebody slips up and they order something that you already have access to on an evidence-based plan, you can just not choose that title when you're choosing your titles for evidence-based. So it's not quite as bad as, you know, if someone purchases a Springer ebook that we're going to get on the Springer platform, if they purchase that same ebook on another platform, that's a little bit more frustrating. But any kind of, you know, workflow management that you can do like this, I think is really helpful because, you know, your subject librarians, they don't spend as much time doing acquisitions, of course, as acquisitions people. So anything that makes it more clear or, you know, helps them communicate to their faculty, I think is going to be very valuable. So after you get all these ebooks, how do you know if it's working for you? How do you know if this method is working for you, if this platform is working for you, if this content is working for you? Well, there's a lot of different things that you can look at, but this is, of course, you're going to have to figure out at your library what metrics you want to use or what criteria really matters to you. So usage is important. Of course it's important, but it's not the only thing. I think a lot of people really rely on usage, particularly for evidence-based for selections, which makes a lot of sense. That's one of the only kind of things that you can see for evidence-based to make your decisions, but it's not the only thing. So when we look at evidence-based programs and are trying to decide, not necessarily trying to decide what individual titles to order, but trying to decide, should we do this program again? We're not just looking at the total number of uses, we're also looking at the spread. So, you know, maybe the usage is really robust, but is it focused just on one area, or is it spread across, you know, all of this content? And we want to look at also, is it, you know, spread across the months, or are there just some months where it's really, really busy, really popular? You know, we try to take a look at all of these different things and try to see how is it being used. Sometimes it feels a little bit like you're trying to read minds or tea leaves or something, but you know, there are a lot of different ways to look at the usage. And I also think it's really important for libraries to have a role in textbook affordability these days. UCF in just the past, say, 2 or 3 years has really gotten involved in textbook affordability, even though it's really challenging. But I think ebooks are a great way for the library to have a role. And we have a librarian, not in acquisitions, in student teaching and engagement, student learning and engagement, who is really focused on textbooks. And I have a great communication with her. We've worked successfully on a number of projects just in the past 1.5 years. And so when I'm making selections for an evidence-based program, I always talk to her, and we try to get the most current textbook list maybe for the upcoming semester, because those books, if they're available on the evidence-based plan, they may not have usage yet. So I still want to make sure that I can hold on to those or select those so that we don't lose access to them. But this can be something too that helps you evaluate package purchases. You know, if you are able to see, you know, compare your textbook list with your titles and your packages, you can see, you know, this, you know, say our Taylor and Francis ebooks, wow, a lot of those are on the textbook list. So a lot of those are required reading. So the library is really providing a lot of value to students this way. And that can be a great argument in favor of the library to both your administration, but also your student government association. We actually got money from our student government association this fall, just a little bit, because we were able to show the value that the library is bringing to students this way. And lastly, you also want to take a look at the interface of the platform that these ebooks are living on. So, you know, they're not all the same. They all work really differently. And I know in some libraries, some people are trying to simplify and just really use 1 or 2 platforms and not get too many. You know, that is just, we are way beyond that at UCF. We have so many different platforms, but you know, it's the same with our journals too. Our journals live on so many different platforms as well. So we are not as concerned about that, but I know that is a big concern for some people. But we do want to look at, especially if we're paying a lot of money for these ebooks, either in a package or an evidence-based program, we really want to make sure that students are able to navigate that platform, when they get to the ebook that they want. Are they able to find it? Are they able to easily download what they're looking for, the chapter or the full book? Are they able to, are faculty able to easily get a permalink to the book to put in their course, online course, all of these things. If the content is really good, we may overlook some of the usability issues. Of course, I pretty much always report them back to the publishers when I find problems or when I, have suggestions. But if the content's good, we may still need it. And then we'll focus on, maybe creating guides, user guides for different platforms, or trying to push it out that way. But, usability is really important. And your faculty, your students, your staff, they really need to be able to use the content that you buy. So it is something that you definitely want to consider. All right, so those are my points. And I can turn it over to Wouter now.
Well, thank you very much. Let me set up my slide deck. There we go, and that should work. All right, again, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Wouter van der Velde. I'm product manager for eBooks at Springer Nature. And I would like to go through our 8 steps to building an effective ebook collection. This is also available as a paper on our website. And once you get the slide deck of this presentation, you also have the links to them. But some people might remember that in the early days, we also did a 10 steps document. And this is the same thing, but updated to today. When we did the first version of this, ebooks were fairly new in academic, and we started with ebooks back in 2006, 2007, on full scale when it was decided that we would digitize all of the books that we have. And that we would publish, and later on, a couple of years after, also decided to digitize our entire book archive. Before that, there were some electronic books here and there, but not on the scale that we are publishing our book program nowadays, where basically everything is e-first, and in some cases even e-only. So we thought it was time to also update the thought process behind not only how to publish books, but also what we think would be the best ways in deciding how a library should go for an ebook collection. And we have put together these 8 steps. As you can see in this this slide, where all of them are outlined, it's not 8 steps consecutive, where at the 8th step it's a full stop. No, it's a circle. This is something that you guys are working on every day of the year, and each of these steps could be with a different vendor. And part of your collection development strategy. So let me move on to the first step. Define your collection development strategy. And this is crucial. Sara was talking about her library that has always high usage, a lot of users, where you have different content needs if compared to if you're in a smaller library with less users, or maybe less users in just a single or a limited amount of subject areas. So we say use the latest data. to reveal where your high demand is. Where are your core research areas in terms of books? Look at frequently used search strings. We provide tools for you to find that. Consider the book types that are included in the collection. Reference materials, monographs, adapt better to online research, but also textbooks. We include textbooks on our platform that can save you and your students a lot of money annually. Thirdly, seek user feedback on recent collection acquisitions and see how your users are using what you provided to them. Finally, always consider the volume of archive material in a collection and the longer term payoff of this material. And as I said in my introduction, we have digitized our entire archive. That is around 120,000 books that we consider archive, basically everything before 2005. It's a huge amount of books. And we've seen so far that libraries who have adapted this, they won't see a full use of that archive in year one, but it takes many years before the entire archive is used. But because it's so well indexed and everything can be crawled, people will find pieces of content within that part over the years. Okay, moving on to the second step. And Sarah mentioned a couple of these points as well in the evaluation of business models. What business model suits your library best, or what business model suits the content need for your users best? Bear in mind that for some books or book types, there are different requirements. For instance, concurrent users. If you represent a lot of users, the amount of concurrent users might be very important, particularly on books that are used for classroom use, where basically an entire classroom needs the same content at the same time. Consider flexible packages or fixed packages, whatever works best for you. The availability of MARC records. We have noticed that the cataloging of content through MARC records at least doubles the usage. It contributes a lot on the discoverability of the acquisitions that you've made. So also look at the timeliness and availability and quality of MARC records by the vendor. We provide MARC records in many different ways. We provide our own MARC records, but we also collaborate with OCLC to provide OCLC MARC records. And those records are basically updated on a weekly basis. We send every new record basically instantly on our platform as well as to OCLC. So they should be available within a matter of days. Continuous access versus access only subscription. Do you need to have perpetual access to the content? And finally, digital preservation and publication quality. I'll get back to the digital preservation later on, but the publication quality, and I'm not talking about the quality of the work necessarily, but really on the quality of the files. Are they ugly scanned PDFs or fully OCR'd high quality PDFs and or EPUBs that are mobile friendly? In our case, we provide both. We provide EPUB files for mobile use as well. Moving on to the third step, pool resources to reduce costs. Depending on the size of your institution, you can or should collaborate with fellow librarians. A regular review of research grants can also help you to be ahead of the curve and invest in the right content. having a note on what projects are happening before you can already acquire content and work together uh, um, with your colleagues in identifying what content and what type of content will be needed for those projects. So check what invoicing options your supplier offers to facilitate the collaboration across departmental and budget lines. Keep a consolidated, updated list of publications that are acquired from both centralized as well as decentralized budgets to ensure that funds aren't being allocated to resources you already have. And Sarah mentioned a valid point here that in some cases you may already have access to a certain book through a package purchase that is then purchased again on, for instance, an aggregator platform. So work together. Any plan spent should always directly support your institution's overall content strategy. Moving on to the fourth step, review your acquisitions policy. So before you embark on any new ebook acquisition, ebook collection, look at budget and policy reviews with librarian liaisons that are key to understand the latest behaviors and needs. So make collection decisions and secure budget approval by department or subject area in conjunction with your subject liaisons. Define a usage profile for a collection which can impact vendor choice. And I was saying this before, for instance, textbooks will need a lot of will generate a lot of use because many students will use the same book at the same time. And this can impact on how and where you acquire such a book. Look at licensing agreements and ultimately the availability of money, obviously. Thirdly, estimate the number of concurrent content users and factor in search behaviors, the number of access points, and also printing requirements. Sarah was mentioning, for instance, the DRM friendly or lack of DRM, which could restrict printing requirements. And finally, assess the cost associated with specialist storage of archives versus the expansion of your ebook collections. It could be that by acquiring a large archive, you can free up a lot of physical space in your library that can either be used for new acquisitions, or it can save you cost to keep books on the shelves and make them available more widely electronically. Point 5, integrate collections and boost discovery. So the next step is to make your new collection as discoverable as possible. Enable link resolvers. Ask the vendor to supply you with the data, the metadata needed to support frequently used link resolvers. We are collaborating with all of the link resolvers that are linked here: EBSCO Full Text, Xlibris SFX, Serial Solutions 360, as well as OCLC. LibGuides, link to subject collections through online research and LibGuides. And thirdly, advanced discovery with a metadata downloader. KBARD, the enhanced metadata downloader that we offer, which is a website where you can quickly click through and select your collections that we offer and download MARC records through this tool. Alternatively, we can set up automatic feeds to your FTP server, or you can pick up records through OCLC, which we collaborate, and also we take on the cost for these records. So there are no additional costs with OCLC if you are picking up their MARC records for our content. And number 6. Promote, promote, and promote again. If you're in marketing, you probably know that there is 4 times promote too little here. If you want to get a message to stick, you need to repeat it at least 7 times. So it's really important to promote your acquisitions that you have acquired for your users. Publishers should be able to provide a variety of print and online promotional tools to help you support your publicity campaigns within your library. Check a publisher's website for dedicated library resources, including on-site and remote training options, banner ads that you can put on your intranet, downloadable posters, and anything else that can help you promote the content that you have acquired. Use email, use your intranet, and also use social media to engage and connect with your users. And finally, regularly repeat. And I cannot repeat this enough, but repetition is how it sticks. And this will help you to make sure that your acquisition, your content acquisition is being used to its maximum. Number 7. This is an important one. Digital preservation. It was mentioned before, but in times where content that you acquired on a platform is no longer available or temporarily not available through any trigger event, it's important that you can ensure continuity to your users. And also, you have acquired content. If through whatever reason this content is no longer or temporarily not available, your users cannot continue their work. Also, you paid for that content. So seek out if the vendor that you're licensing with preserves its content. We are working with both Clocks and Locks as well as Portico, and also a number of national libraries and national initiatives on digital preservation, where the content is stored in case of a so-called trigger event. You may remember that not too long ago, one large partner ceased to exist, where many libraries had to find their acquired content or at alternative places. And digital preservation will ensure that you can continue to serve the content that you purchase to your users. And finally, review and renew. Basically, this is the first and the last step as well. But you can, after you've made an acquisition, review how it's been used over time. And this can sometimes be after a year, but sometimes the true blooming of a content acquisition in terms of usage can only happen after 3 or more years. So look at the usage. Look at the usage on the number of titles in a collection. Find out how researchers in your organization are accessing and reading the content in the collection. Find out whether users are accessing the content on or off campus. And off campus is probably going to be more and more important in these days. How frequently are users printing or ordering print versions of the text? And check that your usage data and investment align with your overall content strategy. And if it doesn't, or if it can be refined, go back to step 1 and refine your content acquisition strategy, your collection development strategy. I would like to conclude with the final slide that has a lot of useful links on it, and we can provide this slide deck after the session, so you will have those links at your disposal. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to give back the floor to Mark.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Wouter. We appreciate the presentation. And looking through our list of questions that we have, There are plenty of questions in the queue. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will answer as many as we have time for. So let's dive right in to some of those. All right, so looking through the list, it looks like you've gone ahead and answered quite a few of questions, Sarah, by typing responses. So
I've tried, but for people who I've answered your question, if I haven't answered what you asked, feel free to ask again.
great, and we may go through just a couple of those so that
Sure.
we've got them on the recording for the people who are watching it a little bit later, because they may have the same questions. So so one of the most upvoted questions that came through, maybe a couple of those we'll deal with right at the top here. One of the questions from Tammy was about titles that are chosen from the evidence-based acquisitions, and are the ones that you choose, are they DRM free usually, or is that, you know, one of the things you look for?
That's definitely one of the things we look for. I think at UCF, I think every single, we've done maybe 5 or 6 evidence-based plans, and I think they have all been DRM free. It is much more likely that I think you'll have an evidence-based plan through a publisher. So I think it's much more likely that an evidence-based plan is going to involve DRM-free ebooks, because, you know, publishers have control over their content. They own their content. They're not like aggregators. So, you know, I think you're much more likely to find that your evidence-based plan has DRM-free ebooks, but it's definitely going to depend on the publisher. It's going to depend on the plan. But that's something to ask for sure.
Great, great. And then maybe to go with one of the other most upvoted ones from Ricky, where Ricky says, how do you address issues of ebook titles that are frequently updated?
That's tricky. So I think there's not an easy answer for that. At UCF, we are similar, I think, to a lot of other giant research libraries in that we don't weed our print collection really pretty much ever. But when I was at a community college library, we weeded pretty heavily, and we were really concerned about having older editions out and just having newer stuff. So I think if that is a big concern that you have, if Ricky, if this is what you're asking, I think there are a couple different ways to take this question. So if you're asking about, you know, newer editions come out maybe every year, those particular titles, that might be better for a subscription versus an outright purchase, or maybe a standing order. If you do want to make sure that you get those every year, you might want to identify those. But for us, I mean, we do have some on standing order, but we're not too concerned about older titles being older editions being in the library or being available. So we just try to make sure then that newer editions get added to the new pool. You know, if we're going to continue to get front lists or if we have backlist or whatever, we're not too worried about it in that sense. But subscriptions can be a great way to handle that, I think. But if you're asking about ebooks that themselves get updates, we do have some titles like that, particularly in Oxford. And I think for the most part, those updates are built into the price that we paid to purchase them. But I know that they do have some that require update fees. So it's kind of a mix.
It can depend on the publisher and their, yeah, that makes sense.
So Ricky, I'm not sure if I totally answered your question, so feel free to ask
yeah, you
again.
can drop another one in the Q&A. We've got a question here that I think might be appropriate for Wouter from Michael. And first off, Michael starts out by singing the praises of Springer Metadata. He says, Springer Metadata is wonderful. And it's great that Springer includes so many textbooks in the bundles, especially as getting ebook textbooks at all for an affordable cost can be very difficult. And Michael wonders if anything can be done to help like the uptake of Springer textbooks. Is there a way to make them more discoverable? Is it possible to generate lists from the metadata for ebooks for different content and format types? such as textbooks. Do you have anything that you would like to talk about with that?
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much for the praise. Happy to hear this. Indeed, we have quite a number of textbooks that are included in the collections, and I'll post in the Q&A a URL where you can find our metadata downloader. This is a tool where you can just click through the collections that you may have or that you're looking into, and easily download a title list from them. Within the title list, you can filter on the textbooks, so you'll have them. And another thing is, even if you don't license the Springer Nature eBooks, but we have also a fair amount of open access books available, and you can use the same tool to just select on the open access books. So even if you don't have the budget to acquire, or if you want to look at which open access books are there, you can just filter out these and download also mark records for these to put in your catalog and promote to your teachers.
Excellent, great. And looking at some of the, oh, it was there just a second ago. They keep moving around. So looking at one of the questions that also was upvoted a second ago, Gabrielle asks, does your library have a popular collection? Do they collect ebooks for it, Sarah? And it looks like sort of.
Yeah, sorry, I just answered it. Yes, we do have a popular collection, but in print. A lot of the popular ebooks, particularly from, you know, the big, well, it used to be big 5 publishers, but I don't think there's 5 anymore. A lot of those are only single user, available as single user ebooks, and that's just not great for UCF. So we do tend to get them in print, and we've heard from students that a lot of times they do prefer to read those kinds of books in print anyway. And usually when we get requests for what we would consider popular titles and ebooks, it's because it's assigned as a reading for a class. So that's a little bit different than like leisure reading. So essentially, yeah, we get them in print, but not as ebooks generally.
Right, okay. And looking through some of the questions here. So one maybe that hasn't been answered in the answered section here is, does UCF hop in and out of evidence-based plans, or do you stay in them for the same year? And I think sort of a related question is it better to have, you know, a couple of years of data before the evidence-based stuff really starts working? Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. So we do kind of a little bit of both. We have some plans that we do year after year. I think our Cambridge plan, I think we've been in maybe 3 or 4 years now, but they require us to make our selections each year. So we can't carry over, you know, our deposit to the next year and make our selections at the end. We have to make selections still year by year. But other vendors or other publishers don't require that. Some of them, I think Elsevier in particular, lets us wait until we're done and we don't have another year that we can pay for, and then we can make all our selections at once. So I think if you can stay in it for multiple years, I think that can be very helpful for getting 2 years worth of data. I think that can be really helpful, but sometimes, you know, we don't have the money at the time, or it just doesn't, the stars don't align and we do have to hop out. So we try to stay in them, but sometimes we can't. And something to consider too, especially if you have money at the end of the year, I don't know if any of us will have money at the end of this year, but you know, in future years, you can sometimes pay for multiple years at once. And that's been really helpful for us to do, you know, we'll pay 2 years worth of deposits at once and then have 2 years of the EBA.
Great. All right, so looking at the time, we may just try to squeeze in one last question. And one that's up at the top of the open questions. I don't know how you feel about this one necessarily, Sarah, but the question is from Amy: have you negotiated interlibrary loan rights for ebooks? And, do you get pushback from the vendors when you talk about that? Or?
Oh, it's such a good question, and I don't have my ILL person next to me, so I don't know. Yeah, that is really involved and really complicated. It is something that we think about and ask for. I don't think we receive a ton of pushback. It's some publishers are really flexible about that kind of thing, and some are really, I guess, kind of conservative about it and are just don't feel like they don't have enough information about it yet. But I think the market is really changing. I know EBSCO was doing kind of a pilot program that our head of ILL heard about, I think, last year. And we really, wanted to get involved in that and kind of pushed to get involved in that. But it's really, it hasn't happened yet. I'll say that. So it's really dependent publisher by publisher. I think, EBSCO, even with their pilot project, it wasn't for all of their ebooks. It was only for their unlimited DRM-free ebooks. So if you had it in that format, for the 2 schools that were doing this pilot, then those were in the pool. So it is really, really complicated, and I'm definitely not an ILL specialist. But I think it's absolutely something to negotiate for and something to consider when you are doing these projects. That said, I don't think we have ILL for anything in our evidence-based plans, but I'm not sure. That is something I would have to look at the license.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised that this question has gotten so many thumbs up. And indeed, we've been asked about this as well. And I believe since the beginning, we have pretty lenient ILL provisions in our licenses and contracts. So we do recognize that this is an important topic.
Great. Well, looking at the time, we've gone a little bit over. So I would just take a second here to say thank you so much, Sara, and thank you so much, Wouter, for doing the presentations.
Thank you.
Clearly there are lots of questions in there, so valuable stuff. And I would take a moment to say thank you to everyone out there listening in today. You'll notice when you sign off that there's a quick survey that we're going to send you to. If you could take a minute just to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. It helps us with the technology and with the presentations. We really appreciate any time you can give us for a quick response there. So again, thank you for your time, and we hope to see you on a webinar in the near future. Bye-bye.